Well, hello. I wanted to take a minute to thank you for joining me. I want to take a couple of minutes to share with you a story that I call a dream that was given a purpose. The picture you see here, I saved in 1996. It was destined for the dumpsters at Raytheon, and it has been in one of my offices ever since that day. You see, I became a runner in my early 20s, and running the marathon, however, was never really my thing. 10 miles, 10 kilometers, those were the distances that I really enjoyed. But, once you get hooked on distance and people know that, the B word will eventually come up. Have you run Boston? I think I was probably 27 the first time that I heard that. With no intention of running Boston or any other marathon at that point, my answer always was, listen, I'm not a marathon guy. But the closer I got to turning 60, the more 60 started to seem like the year that I should go for it. So I made that decision. In 2019, I picked a qualifier target for the summer of 2020, and I began kicking my mileage up. Well, then COVID occurred, and the target that I had picked, the Erie Marathon, got canceled. But the Jim Thorpe Marathon got rescheduled from the spring of 2020 to the fall of 2020. In fact, September 27th on 2020. So on that day, we went to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, and I was greeted with a very pleasant marathon course that was a rail trail, which was, of course, marathon length, a net downhill, but still a qualifying course for Boston. The big question now, having run a time that was good enough to qualify according to Boston standards, was would there be a Boston Marathon? It took 2 months before that question got answered by the BAA in January, on the 26th, when they made sort of a soft commitment to an October 11th marathon, pending medical review and whether or not the city would actually be open to allow that. The next question, of course, is fine, when do we register? And registration finally got announced. It would occur in the third week of April. On April 20th, registration would open and it would close a few days later. So once that big news was in, we knew that we would be registering on the 20th for that race. So we were actually 5 days into an Austin trip visiting Laura when the 20th came. I got online as quickly as I could around the 10 o'clock hour when registration opened on the East Coast. And in spite of the fact that I did my registration in the first hour, I was still registrant number 10,710. There would be another 14,500 qualifiers register before the deadline. Now, you need to understand that in 2021, the Boston field has been reduced in size from 30,000 to 20,000. Now, what that translates to is the 10,000 slots that disappeared really affect the runners that are trying to enter with a qualifying time, because of the 20,000 runners that will race on October 11th, 5,000 to 6,000 of those are actually invited by the BAA, either as part of charity organizations or as elite athletes who are paid to show up at the race. So there are now somewhere around 14,000 spots left to get into the race. And the big question was my time good enough to make the cut? So on May 4th, the email arrived saying I had actually gotten in. I could not possibly have been more excited at the ripe old age of 60 to get an email. I ran from the back of the house to the front of the house, showing Jill just like I had gotten something fantastic for Christmas. And I was very happy to have received that email, because it meant that, in fact, I was in. I was in the 2021 Boston Marathon. I had accomplished what I set out to accomplish, and that goal was fantastic to have behind me. About a month later, I was on a long run. And in the middle of that long run, a still small voice begins to speak in my head. And I hear the whisper of God say, even if you won the 60-year-old age group, not a person on the planet would care. The qualifying thing, that was really your bucket list. To be able to say that you qualified with a time for your age group, that was for you. That's what you wanted to be able to do. That's done. But this marathon that you're running now, maybe this isn't about you. Maybe none of this is about you. So why are you doing this? Could you be doing this for something greater? it was probably less than 30 seconds before a young missionary couple that we had met 2 years ago at a Christmas experience play, playing Joseph and Mary, oddly enough, came to mind. Christian and Rose Roberts, who have started a medical mission in the highlands of Guatemala. So the story of Christian and Rose is that they wanted to establish a medical facility there to provide rehabilitation, restoration, and revival to the Mayan people that live in the highlands of Guatemala, and to enable other medical teams to come visit and provide medical care that would not normally be available to this community while they lived there. And so as I began to contemplate this more and got together with Christian through Dave Hyatt, our missionary pastor at our church, we were able to engage them and sort of lay out a plan. And so I'm going to let Christian spend a few seconds here talking about their vision and how they're working in Guatemala, and let you hear it from them directly.
Thank you for allowing us to hop on this call this evening. Feel like it is truly an honor anytime that we get to share with people, especially new people, what we're doing here in Guatemala. My wife, Rose, is originally from Guatemala. I'm originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I came in 2019. And at that point, Rose and I were we were to be married, and it's always been Rose's dream to live here. She grew up here, this is what was familiar to her. So she said, okay, well, if you want to marry me, we're living in Guatemala. So I came in 2019 because I was determined to win her over and prove to her that I could do it. I was recently graduated from PTA school at the time, had my license. And so I was ready to see patients. I was like, I'm coming, I'm going to see if I can make, work of this in Guatemala, to provide for a family. And really that transformed into a calling to do missions work here. So we returned to the States at the end of 2019, then came back in December of this year. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And shortly after that, we opened an outpatient physical therapy office here in town. Our target population is the indigenous population. The indigenous population is a Mayan group of individuals that make up about 60% of the population of Guatemala as a whole. So it is really the vast majority. And about 80% of those individuals live below the national poverty line. So this is what results in that is just reduced access to healthcare, reduced resources. Even if there is access to healthcare available, a lot of times they can't afford it. The government itself relies on nonprofit organizations, private healthcare organizations. That makes up about 24% of their healthcare here in Guatemala is the private sector. And so our organization would fall into that group, that 24%. So you can see they rely on organizations like ours. And especially during COVID, we have seen that we are being called upon even more, even outside of just physical therapy to, a lot of the medical offices, the doctors in towns, even the hospital has shut down because of COVID. So we've kind of become that point of reference in town, even just for everything, and if we can be that for people, then that's fantastic. At least what we can do, if we can't help them, physically or directly, what we can do is point them in the right direction. So that's what I mean when I say we become that point of reference for individuals. So some of the things that, we are looking for in terms of support is, our base is the physical therapy clinic. That's kind of like the main pillar of what our organization is providing rehabilitative care to those in need, specifically the indigenous population. In addition to that, we are looking to build a guest home on our property that will have allows teams from the United States, individuals, families who want to come down and work alongside our ministry throughout the year. These will include, construction projects, but really our focus is, providing healthcare. So, doing things like nursing, dental work, orthopedic surgeons, those types of things, primary care physicians, family doctors, to come down and offer that care that we're not able to provide on the day-to-day basis. And then in addition to that, another aspect of our ministry that we would like to start to incorporate is kind of an alternative medicine approach. Mayan medicine is very similar to Chinese medicine or alternative medicine. It's what the people of Guatemala know. It's what they understand. And actually, we've seen that physical therapy has been a great avenue into reaching the people because it's a non-invasive form of treatment. It's familiar to them, exactly. So we want to include another aspect of that by purchasing a plot of land or using the land that we already have, growing herbs that are local to this area, and then teaching the individuals how to use that. If you go down any street in town, you find 2 or 3 pharmacies. And oftentimes the doctors here in town are overprescribing. When people have the means to go see a doctor, they're given a list of 5 or 6 medications, your prescription list to go and fill, and they can't afford that. So what we want to do, and a lot of times it's for, the most common ailments. So what we want to do is really provide an alternative for individuals that is cheap, affordable, safe, that they're used to. So those are kind of the 3 aspects: the clinic, the guest home, and then this, we call it la hierba buena, which in Spanish, la hierba buena is spearmint. So it's kind of a play on words. But when you've broken that up, it's la hierba buena, which means the good herb. So those are kind of like the 3 aspects that we're addressing with our organization here.
So in speaking to Christian and Dave Hyatt, our missionary pastor at church, one of the things that became clear was you need to pick a number. You need to have a goal for any of these fundraising efforts to have a meaningful close to them. So I went away, as Christian advised, and started asking God what number made sense. And within a pretty short period of time, 15,000 was the number I arrived at. Now, I got to be honest, I didn't do any research to come up with that number. I didn't really know whether that was a lot or a little based on what Christian and Rose were doing. And when I reached out to Christian and told him the number, he kind of chuckled and said that was the same number Rose had given him earlier that day. Now, it turns out that number recurs in their ministry quite a bit. They recently had a wish list of physical therapy items they needed to equip their physical therapy room. And those items totaled up to about $15,000, $14,870 to be precise. A couple of weeks ago, since we first talked to Christian, that need was met. They got the $15,000 they needed for all of that equipment, and so that's taken care of. It turns out that a few months previous to that, the primary project they wanted to launch, which was building a guest house for medical missionaries to come and work out of their space, got delayed because of a decision they had to make to improve the security in the area where the property was. And that decision was to build a wall around the outside of the property to set a perimeter to make people truly be more safe when they were there and be able to operate out of a position of safety. So they had to construct a wall. Well, shocker, $15,000 is what it cost to build that wall. So now there's a $15,000 hole in their plans for building this guest house. So $15,000 absolutely seems to be the right number and the right target. Our goal is to raise that money by the end of the race on October 11th. So I would be truly honored if you were able to contribute to Rose and Christian's missions work in the highlands of Guatemala for this Healing Hands ministry on my behalf as a sponsor for the efforts in this Boston Marathon. The link to get to the donations are at the bottom of this page. All donations are 100% tax deductible in the US. So www.hhguate.org/donate. And with that, I will say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your hearing ears. And thank you for your support. Shalom.